I have a question here that was actually posted as a comment to a video I did about whether non-dual teachers suffer from a mental illness. So you might want to at least watch that answer also. So the question is, clearly expressed and recognizable, only I wonder whether you ultimately fall into the trap of also making a model of it, namely the model of a simulated world in a simulator. In the other answer, I talked about the Earth being a simulator, a reality simulator. The same as the screen or the wall in the cave, Plato's cave, and the creator in everything. So ultimately, what you're saying is a different way of expressing what has been said by many for thousands of years. I will definitely watch a few more of your videos because it certainly appeals to me. So this is a very valid, very important question to consider. Is what I am saying just another model like so many religious and spiritual teachings or so many philosophers have come up with for thousands of years? And the answer is, of course, yeah, of course it is. But the real question is not so much what it is, but what do you do with it? And so the way I would approach this to begin with is that the real question is, what do we do with a model in our minds? So for me, for example, do I see the teachings I'm bringing forth as some absolute truth? If I do, then I have been trapped. I'm just trapped by a model. And I think if you watch some of my videos, you'll see that I'm not claiming that this is the absolute or the highest truth, because I realize there's much more to understand than what my mind can grasp. So if I'm open that there's more to understand about the world than what I currently know, my mind hasn't become a closed system, at least not completely closed, and therefore I have not personally fallen into the trap of thinking that my model is reality. But the other thing is, what do you do with it in your mind? And do you think it's ultimate reality? Or are you open to receiving something inside your own mind that gives you a higher experience than just the outer explanation? You see, what we get to here is this. What can you do to help people? What I've explained in several of my non-duality videos is that most people on Earth have become trapped behind this veil that's made up of the duality consciousness. So we are trapped in this illusion that we are separate beings. And as I explained, when you are trapped in this illusion, you can't reason your way out of it, because the duality consciousness, you can always find arguments for or against anything. So in other words, you have plausible deniability, plausible plausibility. You can reject anything that counteracts or contradicts your worldview, and you can find things that validate your worldview. So you can believe anything you want to believe. But your sense of reality, as I also said in the other answer, is completely in your own mind. And therefore, the only way out of this is that you make contact with something outside your own mind that seems more real to you. But in order to help that process along, we have these models, we have these spiritual teachings. And it's not that there's only one that works. Many of them can work, but it's a matter of what do people do with them. And it's like I also described in the other answer, the challenge is that once the conscious you steps outside of your normal state of mind, the separate self, you make contact with the reality outside, but do you use that experience to increase your contact, your sense of connection, or do you take that experience and allow your ego to pull it into validating some viewpoint that's here? So let's just take an example, right? 2,500 years ago, the Buddha clearly experienced a higher state of consciousness, attained a higher state of consciousness, made contact with something outside his own mind. So he brought forth a teaching. And that teaching is perfectly valid. And there are people throughout the 2,500 years who have used it to have the same experience that the Buddha had. But there are also many, many people who have taken the Buddha's teachings and turned them into an outer religion, an outer doctrine, an outer system, where they think we just have to study this teaching and do this, and then we'll be saved one day. 2,000 years ago, Jesus clearly was in a higher state of consciousness than most people, clearly made contact with some reality outside his own mind and the collective mind. He gave forth a valid teaching, but what have people done with it? Some people have used the teaching to make contact with the same state of consciousness that Jesus made contact with. Others have turned it into a doctrinal religion that claims to have the absolute truth, and you just need to declare Jesus to be your Lord and Savior and you are guaranteed to be saved. Total contradiction to what Jesus said. So what I'm saying is, any teaching can become a model that limits us, keeps us trapped in separation, or it can become a stepping stone to reaching beyond separation. And it's only a question of what we do with it. You never will be able to create a model or teaching that automatically helps people escape separation. That is guaranteed to help people escape separation. It can't be done. Now, you can go a step further, because this is what my entire approach to spirituality is based on. And this is where, again, I really differ from many of these non-dualists, because my entire approach to spirituality is based on the recognition. There is not only something outside of my own mind, outside of the material universe, there is someone outside of my own mind. And that's partly my higher self, but it's also spiritual beings in a higher realm who have a higher state of consciousness than I have. I call them ascended masters, you can call them other things, but the point here is this. We are inside this material universe. We can call it a reality simulator or something else, doesn't matter. But we are here, and as a result of our state of consciousness, we don't see anything beyond the material universe. We don't see that the material universe is actually existing in a bigger sphere, which I call the spiritual realm. Again, you can call it something else. But we are part of something much bigger. And we are not the only ones who exist in this whole. But we are at a certain level of consciousness where our vision of the whole is limited by this sense of separation, by our physical senses. But there are beings who have transcended that level of consciousness and are in a higher level of consciousness. And they have, throughout the ages, served as our, whatever you want to call them, spiritual teachers. Some people don't like the word teacher, call them spiritual guides, call them something else. So to me, and this is what I was trying to illustrate with the reality simulator analogy, there are these beings who are seeking to help us escape the duality consciousness, the sense of separation, and the suffering it causes. What the Buddha called the siyam samsara, what Jesus called the consciousness of death. They're trying to help us escape this. And throughout the ages, they have given to us, partly by working with people in embodiment, various spiritual teachings and models. So they are seeking to give us something that can help us escape separation. But as I said, once it's expressed in words, and words is pretty much the only thing we can grasp right now, once it's expressed in words, it's open to interpretation. And that means that you can allow your ego to use that revelation to say, this is the ultimate truth. And it's been proven because it came from this higher source. The Bible is the Word of God. And that is a complete misuse, abuse of the teaching and the intent behind it. You see, the whole idea of a real spiritual teaching is that instead of focusing on the teaching and the outer form of the teaching, we use the teaching as a stepping stone to reach beyond the teaching, beyond the material world. What is the real goal of a spiritual teaching? It is to help you connect to the being who gave the teaching. What have they done with most spiritual teachings? They have turned that being into an exception, into an idol. I was shocked last year when I live in a country here in Denmark, and when I drive home from town, I pass a Buddhist monastery. And I just thought, well, let me look up and see if they have a website. And they had a website. And they were talking about the Buddha and how special he was, because all of these miraculous things happened when he was born. And I was shocked by this, because they have obviously turned the Buddha into an idol. And they are using it as he was an exception. But what does the Buddha really want? He wants people to take the teaching and reach a point where they can make contact with the Buddha as he is today. Now, I call him the Ascended Master Gautama Buddha, but you can call it the Buddha. It doesn't matter. There is a spiritual being in the spiritual realm who gave forth the teachings that have now become Buddhism. And that spiritual being does not want to be seen as an exception that nobody can follow. He wants people to use the outer teaching only to reach for him and his consciousness, so they can make contact with that consciousness. Same thing with Jesus. There is an Ascended Master, Jesus, who only wants people to use the outer teaching of Christianity to reach for direct contact with him. I am with you always. That's the purpose of a true spiritual teaching. And I met people who have been on the spiritual path for 30, 40 years who haven't grasped that. That simple realization. They haven't grasped it. And if you haven't grasped it, you are automatically allowing your ego to misuse a spiritual teaching. And you are allowing your ego to use the spiritual teaching to imprison you even more, rather than liberating you from the ego. And whether it's non-duality or Christianity or Buddhism or whatever you have, I see people who turn Ramana Maharshi into an idol. And I don't think that's what Ramana Maharshi wants, in whatever form he exists today. So, you know, it's understandable that people don't get this when they first find the spiritual path and when they first find the spiritual teaching. I didn't get it. You know, you could have told me this when I was 18 and I would have given you a blank stare, you know. But as we walk the spiritual path, it's really essential that we come to understand this, that we come to grasp this, that the purpose is transcendence, and that no teaching expressed in words here on earth is complete in itself. It's only a tool for reaching the being who gave the teaching. Now, as I've said in other videos, there's 4 levels of the material universe. And there are beings in the mental realm, for example, who are channeling teachings that may seem very sophisticated from an intellectual viewpoint. And it may help people's growth that they connect to these beings, but they are not ascended. They haven't totally escaped duality and separation. It's only the ascended masters who have done this. Call them something else if you want, but it's really only those who have gone through the process of the ascension who are completely beyond the illusions of the duality consciousness. And therefore, to me, it's always been clear, those are the kind of teachers I want. Because when I first heard about Ascended Masters back in the early 1980s, I grasped immediately, they are beyond any teacher on earth, any teaching who is embodied on earth. And that is what the kind of teacher I want. I don't want Maharishi Mahesh Yogi anymore. I don't want Ramana Maharshi or even Yogananda, as much as I love Yogananda. I don't want any teacher who is embodied. I want the Ascended Masters. And if you want something differently, if you need something, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But the essence here is this, do you recognize that there are beings in a fundamentally higher state of consciousness than what we have? And this actually ties into, there's another part of the question. I was originally going to answer it as a separate question, but I think it ties in with what I'm talking about here. So the question is, but whether there really is such a thing as a universal consciousness remains a question for me. Consciousness, apart from all identifications and delusions, manifests itself in each of us to a greater or lesser extent in life. But that does not mean that only consciousness is real or that everything is consciousness. The latter may also be an idea of the mind. And so, what I just talked about, universal consciousness, or what some of these non-dual teachers called infinite awareness or Brahman. And I also talked about it in the previous answer. You can say that theoretically, as a mental idea from our state of consciousness, we can say there is this concept of a universal awareness that is featureless. Probably what in the Vedas they call the Atman, the ultimate self or the universal self. I'm not sure exactly how what exactly meaning they put into that. But so you could say this theoretically, but as I also explained, even the Creator who started our world of form is a being. It's not just a principle. It's not a being. It's not a universal state of consciousness devoid of any characteristics. It has a certain individuality. It has a certain intent for creating our world of form. And it chose certain characteristics. And as I said, from the Creator, which is very much above us on earth, there is this entire hierarchy of beings, spiritual beings, ascended beings, that have a progressively lower and lower state of consciousness until we have the ascended masters right above us in the spiritual realm, who are at such a low level of consciousness compared to the Creator that they can actually communicate with us. You know, the Creator is such a high level of consciousness, despite what some people claim. You're not going to have a conversation with God where He talks like a human being. It's just not going to happen. But the ascended masters who are right above us, you can have an interaction with. So all I'm trying to say with this is that in my view, there is no universal state of consciousness. Everything is individualized beings. I know I've talked about the one mind, or the Christ consciousness, or the Buddha nature. But from our point of view, we can't make contact with this universal Christ mind or Buddha nature. We make contact with beings who have realized that they are out of that mind. They are expressions, individualizations of that mind. That's what we make contact with. So, you know, is everything consciousness? You know, it says here, consciousness, apart from all identifications and delusions, manifests itself in each of us to a greater or lesser extent in life. Yes, but it's really the Creator's consciousness that manifests itself as everything in this world of form. And when it manifests itself, it does so as an individual being. And it's not that that individual being is unreal. It has the potential, as I said, to start with a very point-like sense of self and expand that sense of self till we reach the Creator consciousness. And so, to a greater or lesser extent, it manifests itself. But that's up to us how much we have realized that we are out of that Creator's being. And I understand that you can say from our perspective, it will look like the Creator's being is completely individual, completely universal and featureless. I understand that. I had an experience many years ago of what I still see as the Creator, and there was no features that could describe it. There's no words you can put on it. So that's why I understand that you can say this is universal. But it's just only from our viewpoint it seems that way. And when you get more of a feel for how creation works, as I explained in my video about how the world was created, you realize that even the Creator has a certain individuality. It's just so beyond what we call individuality on Earth. So back to this, is only consciousness real? Is everything consciousness? Well, what do you put in the word consciousness? What do you put in the word real? And it also says here, the idea that everything, only consciousness is real and everything is consciousness, could also be an idea in the mind. Well, yes, that's the whole point. Everything that can be expressed in words is just an idea in the mind. It may come from, the expression of words may come from a higher mind than ours. But what we do with it in our minds becomes an idea in our minds. And that's why the spiritual path and the whole idea of spiritual teachings, as I said, anything expressed in words, we can use our minds to make it just an idea in our mind based on how we see life, based on the limitations we have in our mind. Or we can use it as a stepping stone for reaching for a direct experience beyond our minds. Is only consciousness real? What do you mean with consciousness? Is it some universal state of consciousness, or is it the Creator's consciousness? Because you could say that only the Creator's consciousness is real because everything is created out of the Creator's consciousness. You could say that, but it's just words you're putting on. What is real? Well, as I tried to say in my previous answer, if we are in a reality simulator, nothing we can conceive of inside this reality simulator is ultimately real. Only that which comes from outside the reality simulator is real. But then you could say, well, is what the Ascended Masters see, the ones that are just above us in the spiritual realm, is what they see the ultimate reality? No, the ultimate reality would be what the Creator sees. But on the other hand, we can clearly say that when we are in this consciousness of separation, what we see is not real, because it can't exist in long term. It will self-destruct at some point. So what is in the spiritual realm, even in the lowest level of the spiritual realm, is more real than what we experience from separation. So again, it's what I would say here, that is, my conclusion, which it took me many, many years to reach, is we are always at a certain level of consciousness. And what we can grasp is determined by our level of consciousness. To just use a simple metaphor, you are in a forest. There's one of these observation towers with a staircase. So you start at the bottom of the forest, and here you can see all the tree trunks. You see far, there are all these tree trunks. Now you climb up. Now you come up to where now you're at level with the leaves of the trees, and all you see are the leaves. So your perspective has changed from when it was when you were at the bottom. But your level in the tower still determines what you can see. Then you climb higher, and now you can see, you're above the treetops, and now you can see beyond the forest. Oh, there's mountains, there's a landscape, there's a river. And this is how the spiritual path is. And the biggest mistake we can make, if you want to talk about mistakes, is to assume that at our present level of consciousness, we can grasp everything there is to grasp. And this is what I see some of these non-dualist teachers, they seem to be, as far as I can tell, assuming this. That they have reached a level of consciousness where they can grasp everything. And what I'm saying is, are you still in a physical body on this hellhole of a planet called Earth? Because then you have not reached the level of consciousness where you can grasp everything. For that matter, you won't reach that until you reach the greater consciousness. So it's extremely wise to realize, I am just at a certain level of consciousness here. And what I can grasp is just what I can see from this level. But I'm striving to rise to higher levels. And as I reach those higher levels, I will see something I can't see today. And it may totally change my perspective, because it may be that what I'm seeing today is not necessarily wrong, but it's just one little aspect of a much bigger picture. And when I see that bigger picture, I get a completely different perspective. And if you have that in mind, whatever teaching you are following right now will not become a model that holds you back, because you're not trying to defend the model or validate it. You're just using it as a stepping stone for climbing the next steps up the staircase of consciousness. If you, like the non-dualists do, deny that there's a staircase of consciousness, but that they have reached the ultimate level and they are awakened or they are enlightened, well, then you are never going to see what's beyond that level, are you? How can you? If you're at the level where you see the leaves of the trees and you say, that's it, there's nothing but leaves, how are you ever going to climb to the next level where you can see beyond the trees? It just can't happen. And that's all I'm trying to say with all of my non-duality videos. That whatever they claim that this non-duality is, this non-dual awareness, this enlightenment, this infinite awareness, there's something beyond. There's more to know. There's more between heaven and earth than what is dreamt of in your philosophy.